Welcome to a little bit more art instruction by me, Marlin Adams. And my duty and responsibility as an instructor is to try to replicate myself. In other words, teach you how to do what I do and hopefully maybe even make you more successful at this than I am. It's interesting that we can develop skills to the point where we have sensitivity. I was watching a basketball game the other day where a player went through the crowd of defenders and was able to make a basket, but the commentator said that's not taught, that's a feel. So it's really to a degree, the amount of time that you spend doing this sort of thing helps you to understand how to go beyond what most people can do. So we're going to just do some simplified forms here so that you understand the basis of how to get the proportions of a portrait and what to look for to make a good portrait happen. So here I go. I'm going to geometricize this a little bit. I'm going to do an eye. So when I geometricize, that means I'm using straight lines, angles. What I'm doing here is interesting because I'm actually, the upper lid overlaps the bottom lid, and those are things to notice. And when I get the form on here, there's the tear duct area. So then the next thing we're going to do, we're going to create the position of the eye simply with an angle to position it. I could push it to one side or another, but we're going to just get it in position. Once we get these angles working, then we can round out these features. So this is what generically an angularized eye looks like. And when the eyebrow comes in here, it comes in closer on the inside edge and moves up and angles out like this, and then comes down again. So now we're going to model this stuff a little bit. That means we can come in here and get the shapes like they really do occur. You'll notice that normally an iris is covered 1/2 or about 1/3 by the upper lid. So we can round that out. Now, the peak of the lid comes a little to the inside on the top and a little bit to the outside on the bottom. So it's not just an almond shape. So you're really looking at what these little shapes produce. And the eyelid, of course, this is something that is pretty important because it adds so much if you recognize all the details. So we will get into the center. Now the pupil is located exactly in the middle of the iris. And normally the highlight of the eye, if the light is coming from the upper left, we'll pretend in this situation, it's going to occur at the juncture between the pupil and the iris at about that position. Now, of course, we can get the effect of the transparency of the eye by putting in the details here. So I'm in the dark. I'm going to speed this up just a little bit. Grab a bigger piece of charcoal and darken this, because this is where we want to get a lot of contrast. Again, the most important part of the face is the eye. The most important part of the body is the eyes, and so this should take a lot of our focus. Now, when the light is coming down on those features, of course, it creates a nice shadow over the eyeball. And what happens, since this is the iris is actually a concave shape, so it gets darker up at the top find my worn edge a little bit. And it becomes a little transparent at the bottom, or you get the catch light in the eye. If you look very closely at eyeball, there's this ring that occurs around the iris, and that's an overlap of the white of the eye over the iris. This white of the eye is called the sclera, and it overlaps slightly the iris, and it gets a little bit lighter as we come down here. So we're going to make the eye, the pupil, as dark as we can get it, because that's actually a hole in the iris, and it gets extremely deep. So when we create these lights and darks that occur around the eye, then it begins to look transparent. So if the light's coming from the upper left, we're going to give it a little bit of a shadow on the right side, and we're going to give it some highlight there in the tear duct. Now, the forms that surround the eye are vastly important. You've got to put those in because they really give emphasis to the eye. That's why women put on makeup, because it gives more contrast to the eye, and it becomes much more fascinating when we have those forms working. So we have a highlight there on the eyelid, and we have some curvature there on the eyelid, and then it gets dark between the eyelid and what's happening here on the brow. If the light's coming from this direction, you're going to have a little bit of shadow, and this is typical of the eyes. Shading on the inside of the eye as it comes close to the nose, and then shading towards the outside. And this is a rounded form, so it folds gently into this crease between the eyelid and eyebrow. And then you have an indentation where it actually becomes a little bit deeper on the outside edge. Now, of course, the eyebrow is really important. It comes a little bit lower on the inside edge, then will arch outward and become a little bit thinner. And we have this shape going on. And it gets a little bit darker, especially as it folds into the shadow of the eye and right up against the nose. It gets normally a little bit darker. What happens down here? Now, when we create the eyelashes, we can create them, but you got to be real careful to make them not look like the rays of the sun. They're thicker towards the outside edge, so you're going to have some of this going on a little bit, and especially towards the outside edge. Same thing on the bottom. They're a little bit thicker towards the outside edge of the eye, thinner towards the inside, and there is a shadow that comes underneath the eyeball, and a lot of people are very reticent to put anything underneath the eye because they might think that that's a bag in the eye, and so they're very careful not to do that. Well, if you don't do that, it doesn't look good at all. It looks a little bit fake. So you've got to put the shape, because everybody, the eyeball actually pushes out a little bit and turns the skin a little bit outwards as it comes up to meet the eyeball. So then you have this, we're going to widen that a little bit. And we can continue this formation and modeling of this a little bit more. And we can even give the little bit of an effect of the halftone or core shadow reflected like cast shadow stuff. So we can make this maybe a little bit darker towards the outside end. A little bit darker as it comes to the inside corner of the eye. And of course this, as it comes up against the nose, will be a little bit deeper. And the shape of the shadow as it comes down the barrel of the nose actually kind of gives you a little bit of a triangular shape. The bone of the nose comes out to about that position, and then the rest of it is gristle from there on out. And the more contrast we can create against that eyeball, and even including perhaps a little bit of shadow of the thickness of the lashes and so forth, might tend to help that form. Okay. There is a little bit of shadow again. If you understand the structure between the eyebrows, there's an indentation. So you have this a little bit of form that goes from eyebrow to eyebrow. That's called the glabella. It's a little bit of a deeper indentation across the eyebrows. Depending on how thick you want to make those brows. And this will go much deeper, just if the light comes from this direction, especially if you got hair covering it, or if female especially, you got hair falling down, of course it's going to be darker. So all this helps contribute to the form. So we're going to look at a couple other features. I'm going to turn the page. We'll do a nose and lips combination.